Crimelight podcast contains subject matter that depicts violence, adult language, and may be sensitive to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm your host, Lauren.
And I'm Jasmine, your co-host.
And we are Crimelight podcast.
Together, we work to shine a light on missing persons and unsolved murders.
His whole family called him Uncle Coby. Just like his 4 young nieces.
They were his absolute world. He was at every birthday party and every event, and they adored him.
But the popular rising star of amateur roller derby was found mysteriously shot dead just last month.
It certainly is a mystery that our agency is struggling with, our community is struggling with, obviously his family is struggling with.
Now, cops are at a loss trying to solve the baffling murder case.
And it's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I've had episodes where I'm just sobbing on the floor, and sometimes I'm screaming because I'm so mad.
Koby's younger sister, Kayla, says Coby, a well-educated college graduate and retail store manager, had everything to live for.
He was young. He was thriving. He was doing well. Anytime I was upset, anytime I needed someone to talk to, and he was always there.
And Coby never went a day without calling Kayla.
Hey, it's me. Give me coffee. Love you. Bye.
Coby had also been a tower of strength for his amateur roller derby team.
Everything you could ask for in a teammate, he was willing to do it all. He's one of the happiest people I think I've ever met.
Tragically, Coby's teammates would be the last to see him alive. At an evening practice session at the rink.
So he left practice. It was a Monday night. Practice was over at 9 p.m., so he would have gotten home around 9:30.
Computer records show that a tired Coby sat in his car in the parking lot of his apartment complex, delivering what are believed to be his final words.
He posted onto Facebook, "Practice was so hard tonight. I've been sitting in my car 20 minutes. My legs are just so tired I don't want to go in." That was the last thing anybody heard directly from Coby.
The following morning, just before noon, some teenagers make a grisly discovery at a favorite fishing hole. It was here behind the apartment complex where Kobi Walden's body was found, hidden along this creek right here, tucked away in the woods. He was riddled with bullets. And when police find Coby's practice bag not far from where he parked, they theorize he had been confronted by the gunman while walking from his car to his apartment.
We either believe he ran because the suspects encountered him with a gun, or he was ordered to the wooded area where he unfortunately was shot multiple times.
So first off, we want to thank everybody who is tuning in and listening right now. We thank you for coming to our first episode. We are a work in progress, so you will hear a little bit of inadequacy as far as audio quality at certain points, just through the audio of connecting with different people. We are doing this remotely. So our first episode is the murder of Kobi Lee Walden. You just heard the clip from Crime Watch Daily, which gave you a breakdown of information that the news was portraying out in the beginning. We've been lucky enough to speak to several people throughout this podcast. You will hear from Diana and Simon. Simon is a derby teammate from his roller derby team, and Diana was a best friend from college. So we're going to blend in just a moment and show you a little bit of who Coby was through the excerpts of these two individuals. First, you're going to hear from Simon.
Coby joined the team about a year after I did, and he was always one of the once he joined, Coby was such a force, such a positive force and positive energy on the team and just personally. He was someone who was always smiling, even when hard things were going on in his life. He would always just be there. He'd be there. He'd make practice fun. He'd make derby fun. Um, Outside the track, he was a great person to be around, to organize things, to organize around. We'd go. I remember one time near near the end of his time with us when we all went out to a group of us went out to mini golf together, and just the amazing experience it was just to spend time with him and be around him. It was hard to be sad around Kobe. He just was incredibly uplifting. When I heard that Kobe was gone, um, I was actually at dinner with my parents. They were in town that evening, and we were out eating, and I got a text message, or no, it was a notice on Facebook, and I looked at it, and my heart just sank. Um, I was blown away. I didn't know how to react. Just the idea of losing him. Um, it's been hard. There after the after the funeral, there was a group of the rebels, myself included, that one of Kobe's last things when he was talking with the team was he was talking about how he wanted to get some commemorative tattoos, or get some team tattoos to really bring that unity, because that's what Kobe was. He was a unifier. So after the tragedy, after the murder, a group of us went out and we got those tattoos together. Um, it was actually my first tattoo, and it's something that I look to every day, to remind myself who he was, and really that unifying nature. There are still times when I'll just will be skating at practice, or not even necessarily during a derby thing, but there will be times when I'll just think, I'll just sit back, and it'll hit me that he was taken in that way, that he's gone, that he was murdered. I've lost people in my life before, to various things, to cancer, to old age, to many different things, but the tragedy, the violence of Kobe's murder, it stands out like nothing else. Just the idea that someone could do that to such such a positive individual, to anyone, um, but especially to someone like Kobe. It makes me sad. It makes me frustrated. It makes me angry. Um, and just not having that, not having that, same sort of closure, having that tragedy, really just gets to me at times.
And now we're going to hear from Diana, who is Kobe's best friend that he met in college.
Kobe and I met at Butler University. We were both in the marching band. He was a drummer and I was in color guard. He was constantly the performer, so he was loud and fun and made everybody laugh constantly. Um, we shared basically the same sense of humor. So I was usually one of the ones laughing the loudest at all of his jokes. And we hit it off right away. Um, And then I'm a couple years older than him, so I was already in Kappa Kappa Psi, which is the band service fraternity, and Kobe joined his freshman year. So band is really what brought us together, and everything else is what kept us together. Um, I mean, he and I have been there through the best and the worst times in each other's lives. I was there for his dad's funeral. Um, he was there for me during my divorce. Um, he was also then there for me once I met my current partner. And when I found out I was pregnant, he knew before my brother and sister knew, or our sister-in-law knew. Um, so I mean, he was such an integral part of my life. He was there for everything. So yeah, so it's been a really rough couple of years. Oh yeah. So Kobe had the best laugh on the planet. It was loud and full of so much joy and happiness. And I mean, it would, for me, the definition of happiness, like if you could jar it, it would be Kobe's laugh. So you always knew when he was coming and he was in a goofy mood. Like there was no, I guess, like poker face on that. Um, and I remember, I think this is probably the most random thing that happened. But I was in my dorm room. Um, Nothing exciting was happening. I was in there with my roommates. We were all just, doing homework and whatever. And we could hear Kobe giggling, which meant he was coming. Um, and it usually meant he was coming to our room. Um, and I walked out into the hallway and he was dressed in an ugly Christmas sweater. It was probably like October. I mean, this was not at Christmas time. And he was wearing hot pink Easter bunny ears. And he just thought he was the funniest human being on the planet. Um, and I happened to have a set of reindeer antlers in my room. So as soon as I saw he was dressed like that, one of my roommates had opened the door. And so in response, I went and put on my ears before he saw me and then answered the door like I always just wore those ears. And he was just laughing so hard. It was the stupidest thing you've ever seen in your life. And it is my favorite picture. One of our friends took a picture of the two of us dressed like that. Um, and yeah, he was the Easter Claus and I was Busty the reindeer. So that was, like I say, the stupidest thing. Um, my favorite picture the two of us have ever taken. And that's what I go back to every time I really, really just need a light moment, is going back to that. So when I found out what happened to Kobe, I was 6 months pregnant with my first and only child. Um, and it was, until that moment, one of the happiest times in my life. Things were looking up. I had, an amazing support system, a great family, a great group of friends. I was so excited for everything. And then um I had missed a phone call from Kayla, Kobe's sister, earlier that day. Um had a really busy afternoon and hadn't been able to call her back and had figured I would do it when I got home. Um so after I got home, I got a phone call saying, "Have you been on Facebook?" And I said no. And I was told to stay off of it. My boyfriend was on the way over, and I listened. And so when I got there, he let me know about Kayla's um, post that she had written, and her concerns. I listened to the voicemail from Kayla where she had told me that Kobe hadn't gone to work and hadn't called in, which was so unlike him. Um, and had asked if I had heard from him or if I knew where he was. Um, and my whole life exploded in that moment. Um, I don't. I think the hardest thing in all of this for me is I can't understand why anyone would want to hurt him. He didn't make enemies. Um, there were very few people that he even disliked. He had so much empathy and compassion that if there was someone that he didn't necessarily get along with, he chalked it up to life experience, and that they just hadn't had a chance to get to know each other well enough yet, and that it would be okay later. So, I think for me, I will never understand the why of this, because for me, there's no acceptable reason why. But for all of us who loved him and cared about him, and he meant the world to all of us. And for us, while the why will never be known, I just want to say to anybody out there who heard something or saw something or knows more than what they're letting on, please just contact the police and let them know. Closure won't fix anything, but it will definitely give us peace of mind. So please just speak up.
And that's exactly why we do this, Jasmine. People often forget that these aren't cases on a podcast, they are people. So we hope that shined a little bit of light on who Kobe was as a person, so that you all can connect and understand that this isn't just another episode. This isn't just a case in a case file. This is a brother, an uncle, a best friend and teammate who has, the ripple effect has been great. Next, you are going to hear our interview. We're lucky enough to speak to Kala Klein, who is Kobe's sister. She's been a huge advocate for her brother. She's been on many different news interviews. We'll definitely link a few on our page. We took everything to get through that. We did speak to her prior and do a pre-interview, but yeah, that was definitely a emotional episode portion to create as far as the interview goes, and that's what you're going to hear next. Okay, so today we have been lucky enough to talk with Kala Klein, who is Kobe's sister. And if everybody could just say hi, we've got Jasmine and you've got me, Lauren, and then we've got Kayla on the line. So Kayla, if you want to say hi real quick.
Hi.
And Jasmine, you're there?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
All right, great. So we've got everybody on the line, and this is obviously going to be a pre-recorded call that gets edited into the podcast. But we're here talking with Kayla today, and she has been such a proactive source and advocate for her brother through everything that they've gone through. And she is going to be kind of our go-to in this case. So she's going to be who you hear from and who sets everything up. We do realize that this is, a conversation of the most difficult portion of your life. So if there's ever a moment that you need to take, please feel free to do that. But if you could just kind of take us back to the very beginning when you heard about things and you learned about everything on where we're at today.
So May 1st, I had spoken with my brother several times that day. He was my absolute best friend in the whole world, so that was pretty common for us to speak multiple times a day. He had told me that he was headed to roller derby practice, and so he was going to get off the phone with me. And from what I hear from his teammates, he had a really good practice. Things went well. He went to the grocery store on his way home, and he sat in his car for about 20 minutes or so. He was sore from roller derby practice and really just didn't want to get out of his car. I think we can kind of all relate to that sometimes. So upon getting out of his car, he had been posting on Facebook and Snapchatting and all of that. He got out of his car, got his things out of his car, and then he was met in the parking lot by someone who had been reportedly lingering around the parking lot. And at that point, his bags were put down. He was confronted by this person with, we believe he was holding a gun at that point in time. My brother tried to run for his life. He turned around and ran towards the back of the building, an area that he was very familiar with. He had brought his dog Teddy back there quite a bit to go to the bathroom and just kind of walk around with him and play. So he ran back there. As he was running back there, he was shot several times from behind. And he was left out there overnight. The following morning, about 11:45, he was found by a group of teenagers who called it in. And obviously he was gone at that point. He had several wounds. They weren't able to report at that point in time what he had died from, at least to me. And I didn't find out until later. I got a phone call from his employer. They were letting me know that Kobe had not made it into work that afternoon. Actually, that morning. He was supposed to be in there in the morning to open the store, and he hadn't showed up, which was very odd for him. He was always on time. He was always very dedicated to his job. And I actually tried to bargain with his boss to save his job. I was like, please, don't fire my brother. He's always really good about getting to work, and I just want to make sure that he still has a job. Maybe he overslept or he was tired. And at that point, I didn't realize how incredibly severe everything was. And then at that point, I had to try to find my brother. So I didn't call him, which is very odd. I feel like maybe, I don't know, like somehow I knew that he wasn't with us anymore, but I didn't even try to call him. And I hadn't spoken to him that day because I thought he was at work. So when they called me, I contacted his friend Diana, and I tried to, talk to her and get her to go check on Kobe to make sure he was okay, because I didn't know what was going on. I called my mom. I asked, have you heard from Kobe today? And she hadn't heard from him either. So I get on my computer and I pulled up the local news website, and right on the front page was my brother's apartment building. And I knew then, my stomach sunk. I was hopeful for a little while that maybe he was somehow a witness or something, and they were holding him and wouldn't let him go or something, anything other than the obvious. So at that point, I had called the Indianapolis Police Department. They redirected me to county, and then county ended up directing me to the coroner's office. And they asked me to describe my brother. And I described, he had a green mohawk at the time, and he had a tattoo on his shoulder. And I described all these things, and the lady told me, yes, the deceased does have those characteristics. And at that moment, my entire body just felt like it wasn't my own, and I fell to the floor. And I had to, talk to my mom, who was calling me the entire time I was trying to call and figure out what was going on with my brother, but I didn't want to talk to her until I knew for sure what was going on with him. And the rest of the week was a big blur of trying to, get all those things ready for the funeral and dealing with detectives and IDing his body at the coroner's office, notifying friends and family. It was an awful situation all around. And I remember, finding things out about the case, the fact that there was someone lingering around the building that night. Someone did report that. So we do have someone, was kind of waiting for him to get out of his vehicle. There were several people that were investigated throughout the investigation. But at this point in time, we do not have any solid answers as to who killed my brother and why he was killed.
Okay, great. We're going to keep a pause right here for just 1 second. Okay, so we are going back, and I'm just going to pull from research that we've done and touch upon that because it just may be something that had gotten missed. Now, going back to, he had gotten out of his car. This was roughly around the 9:30, 9:45, somewhere in that region. But wasn't there a phone call that we later was found out that was called in about shots fired that evening?
Yes, it was a little after 10. I think it was like 10:03 time frame, where it was called in that shots were heard. They went and looked, but there were shots reported all through that area. So it was really hard for police to pinpoint exactly where those came from. I know they did drive through.
Okay, so when we had spoke before, I know we had talked about him coming home, and it was mentioned that he had belongings that were sat down. Was there anything suspicious about the way they were sat down? Did it look like they were tossed, like he was ambushed, or were they set down in a normal fashion, like he might have known the person that he was getting ready to speak with?
Everything was intact. I actually received these belongings back. It was his practice bag. He had a bag of groceries and a gallon of milk, and everything was intact. And I mean, there weren't any bumps or dents in the milk bottle or anything like that. So to me, it looks like they were sat down and not tossed. Because I don't, I've dropped a gallon of milk before. Actually, there's a funny story with Coby and a gallon of milk that I had dropped at his apartment building and splattered all over my car. And it kind of explodes like a bomb. It goes everywhere. But this was not the case, and nothing in that bag was touched. It was all left alone. It was wet from being out in the rain that night, but otherwise, everything was intact.
Okay, so to kind of look at that at a perspective that maybe not everybody else would look at it as, but just being that, we've worked on different stories, and I kind of have one of those minds. It's like, okay, let's assess. So essentially he's in his car, he's sitting there, he puts out this message onto Facebook about, I'm tired, great practice. But then he stopped at the store, so he's got his practice bag and he's got groceries and, like you said, a gallon of milk. So he gets out of his car and those are placed down. The milk was upright, correct?
As far as I know.
Okay. So, I mean, but at least everything's intact. Or, like you said, I mean, if you're being approached by somebody that's, coming at you, you might drop everything in like a haste of just like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But these seem to be set down like, oh, maybe somebody came up to him and approached him that he may even recognize and was going to speak with, or he's just extremely calm person. And if he's approached by somebody with a gun, he's got the calmness to set those down and try to reason with him. Now, I know that we've discussed, his personality prior, and I've talked to, a handful of people to discuss, who Coby was. He seemed extremely non-confrontational. So, I mean, if we look at it that way, I mean, how do you think Coby would have handled that situation? Even if he was being confronted by somebody who probably was there to cause harm or rob him or what have you, would he have set those down calmly, or would he have been more of a person that would have been startled and scared and just dropped everything?
He would have been startled. I had actually talked with Diana on Facebook about how, both me and my brother are not very relaxed people, and we joked that his chill was broken because he was not that kind of person. He would have freaked out the second he saw the gun. And Coby did not like guns. That was not something that, ever made him comfortable. He was always uncomfortable in those kinds of situations. And I have an anxiety disorder, and my brother has one as well. And we both, would have panicked in that situation. I mean, it's hard not to, even just a normal person, but let alone someone with anxiety. I can only imagine he would have been incredibly panicked.
And it's fair to say that you know your brother best. You guys were really, really close. You talked nearly every day. So, I mean, that's something to consider, that you would know how he would react. So, going further from that, then what were you told by police as far as what they thought was the motive in this murder?
They had bounced the idea off me that maybe it was a robbery, because his wallet was missing. And he was wearing my father's ring, which was also missing, and his cell phone was taken. Otherwise, we couldn't find anything as far as, him having any. He had no involvement in drugs or with any bad people or anything like that. My brother was very straight edge, and I mean, he would, go out to a bar sometimes and drink with friends. But aside from that, he didn't have a drug problem. He didn't have anything to do with any of that. So it was shocking to me to begin with that he had been shot. Because how do you believe that when you look at this completely innocent and sweet person, and then to be told, well, they were shot? That's shocking, because you think of, people being shot as in being involved in gangs or being involved with drugs. But when you have someone who wasn't involved in any of those things to die such a violent death, you question everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jasmine, I want to have you chime in a little bit. I mean, so far with what we've discussed, what questions do you have? Where are you at with this?
So, just listening to, the way that his items were set down, one thing that does strike me as really odd, and Kayla, obviously, we'd love your input on this. So his items were set down. As you had mentioned, a few of his personal belongings were taken. Um, to me, it seems as if it were a robbery, like the police maybe thought, there would be more than just the ring and the wallet and the cell phone taken. Certainly you would think that the perpetrator would have rifled through the bags of groceries and the gym bag to see if there was anything else of value. Um, have you ever known your brother to maybe have any rifts with anybody, or would there have been anybody that maybe had something against your brother to have had a motive? I mean, I know you mentioned that he wasn't into drugs, maybe past relationships, anything like that, or was your brother just genuinely somebody who was friends with everybody?
Kobe absolutely was someone who was friendly with everybody. I mean, I've had people who have messaged me who have only met him a couple times and talked to me about how sweet he was to them or how kind and how he just had this light about him. And that's just who he was. I mean, he could make friends with anybody in the room. But he did have a bad breakup prior to this. And that's been a big concern throughout the case. I mean, they had been together for about 8 years and things ended very badly. They had a lot of fighting about things in the apartment before he had moved out. There was definitely a lot of confrontation there.
What about, so Kobe's friendly personality? It seems to me that then he probably would have known maybe some of his neighbors in the complex, or they certainly would have known of him, with him just having that outgoing, friendly personality. Did anyone happen to see anything? Has anybody ever come forward and told you, hey, we were there that night, or anything of that nature?
No, no one has come forward with me. However, I mean, there was a witness, as I had stated earlier, that did see someone lingering down towards the bottom of the apartment complex. It was a two-story complex, and he lived on the second floor. So, around where his car was parked, they had noted they had seen him in his vehicle, and they also noted that there was someone else outside of the car who was kind of just lingering, didn't seem to have a purpose, just kind of, waiting. He hadn't really lived in that building very long. He had moved from a different building in the complex into something smaller since he was newly single. And so he hadn't made a whole lot of friends there. I mean, I met some of his neighbors when I helped him move in. They all seemed very friendly, and the people like to talk about the crime in that area. And after all of this has happened, I've done a lot of research and found out there has been a lot of robberies and battery issues and things like that there that I was not aware of prior, or I probably would have told my brother about them. But upon looking into that kind of gives you a little bit more insight into the situation. But when I was moving him, I mean, we had our vehicles wide open with his things and nothing was ever taken. I mean, it was very late at night. It was like midnight when we were helping him move. We never had any bad interactions with anyone. I mean, it seemed like a decent place to live. They had recently redone the apartment complex and made it look nicer. And all of his neighbors were friendly and were helping us move things. At the time, it just seemed fine.
To kind of go a little bit further into our investigation, so we didn't only just look at the time that this happened, we kind of had to look at that area as a whole. And so there was actually a murder a month after Kobe's murder, which was somewhat similar. Fact that it was a couple that came home, they pulled into the parking spot and were coming home from the store getting ready to unload groceries. They were approached by witness account, which the witness is the woman's fiance. He was dressed in all black with a mask, approached with a gun. She was shot once and it was fatal. He was shot multiple times. Police arrived. He was actually in the apartment and had made the phone call, and he did survive. But this did happen a month afterwards. So there has been, issues in this apartment complex. Even recently, October of 19, there was a shooting, actually two shootings, but police have said that that was more of an isolated incident. They're aware of what's going on there. So the police have actually said that, there could have been a connection between Kobe's murder and Aaron Mills' murder. What are your feelings on that? Because I have to also look back at what you had said. He had just recently moved in that apartment. So if we're thinking somebody, knows his schedule or knows him, there's only a handful of people that had been to that apartment to actually know where he had recently moved. I mean, that was what I got from our pre-interview, but I just want to let you kind of clarify on my thoughts, and probably to those that are listening's thoughts, just trying to assess everything that, the information that's been given.
My concern with, someone lingering and possibly knowing his schedule was perhaps they knew his schedule, but they knew him prior And he didn't live very far from his other building. It wouldn't have been hard to figure out where he had moved to, especially if you knew his vehicle or anything like that, or if they had, seen him coming from somewhere else. It wouldn't have been hard to figure out, where he lived, especially since they weren't in front of his specific apartment. They were at his building, but they weren't in front of his actual apartment. So, I mean, there is a
Correct.
possibility that, they did just know that. However, as far as the Aaron Mills situation, I have really mixed feelings about that. I got that report. A lot of people were tagging me in it on Facebook, and at the time, it was a very, very volatile time for me. It was very emotional. I was still trying to navigate my grief and survive at that point in time in my life. So I did a lot of research into it. I ended up speaking with Aaron Mills's brother. They didn't really seem to know, what had been going on. And right away, I reached out to my detective and tried to figure out what they knew about it. As horrible as it sounds, it was obviously I was devastated for her family, but I was also hopeful that maybe this would shed some light on Kobe's case. Maybe this would give us a clue that we needed. Maybe this was the same person and they left something behind this time, or they did something different than what they did before. So there was a little bit of that there too. But, it took a long time, weeks, for the detective to get back with me about, the casings did not match in this case. So the same gun was not used to kill Aaron Mills that was used to kill Kobe. So we do at least know that. As far as whether it was the same person with a different gun, obviously until we know who killed Kobe, I can't say that.
Your family and friends all pooled donations. You were able to get a billboard up. Nothing has came of that, unfortunately. I mean, it was a very tried and true effort on everybody's parts. The reason that we're doing this podcast is that we're hoping that someone hears this. We're hoping that somebody saw something, knows somebody, has overheard something. Because at this point, we're 3 years in and your family and you specifically have no answers. So, to further upon that, if you could kind of discuss your thoughts on that, where you're at with that, what you would ask to anybody who could possibly have that little bit of information that could be helpful, what would you say?
Well, at one point, it was a year and a month after, my brother had been killed, where we did receive a tip that someone close to my brother had actually threatened to kill him. They had asked someone to help them find a gun and help someone to do it. So that information was very unsettling. I didn't really know how to take that, and it was a phone call that I received at almost midnight. And it was very, very emotional to hear that, because when you know your brother and you know that he's this sweet person and just this nice human being, and to hear that someone actually talked about this and wanted to go through with this, then you have to wonder how big of a coincidence is that the person would be talking about killing my brother a few months before his death, and then suddenly he winds up dead. Unless this person has the best luck in the freaking world, that just doesn't seem so coincidental to me. So you have to wonder that. And I do encourage anyone who knows anything more about that to come forward. We haven't had luck with getting the person who reported that to me, getting them to talk with the detectives. But I do hope that someday they will. And I hope that anyone who has any information will come forward. Because I can't bring my brother back to life. I can't. It's been very hard living without him. After my dad died, and we went through hell and back together. So to lose him was such a very big chunk of my heart to put in the ground. And I just want answers for him, and I want to be able to be his voice, and I want to be able to say that I did something for him, because I couldn't protect him. And that's really all I tried to do. We tried to protect each other and be there for each other through everything all the time. And I wasn't able to do that night. And I've actually kicked myself in the butt for not being on the phone with him that night, thinking maybe that would have made a difference, or at least I would have heard the shots and I would have been able to report it sooner. Anything. You always place guilt on yourself in those situations, I think. But I just want answers for him, and I want answers for us and for my mom. I want us to be able to know why this happened, because it doesn't feel right. Not knowing, it doesn't feel right that someone is out there living their life and Coby is in a coffin and our lives are ruined. I mean, they're never ever going to be the same. We still cry regularly. My grief has played a big part in my life. I have anxiety and PTSD, and I don't get out of my car at night. I don't There's a lot of things that I can't do since my brother was killed, and it's affected our lives. And I want answers for that. I want someone to be responsible for everything that they've done.
And we couldn't agree with you more. We can't possibly thank you enough for joining us and being a part of this podcast to shine a light on your brother's crime and murder. And it's not fair that your life was completely changed at the hands of someone else and his life was ultimately ended. So we ask that if you have any information pertaining to the death of Kobi Lee Walden, which if you don't mind reminding everyone where the apartment complex is located in the name of it, Kayla.
The apartment complex is located on the south side of Indy in Southport. It is called Southport Crossing Apartments.
And you can call 317-262-TIPS with any information. You can remain completely anonymous. This is through Crime Stoppers. If you could just tell everybody what has actually been stolen from you in a sense that you won't get to experience, they've not gotten to experience. I know I talked with Diana and she was so kind to speak with us, and she was 6 months pregnant when this happened. So she got the fact that, this is his best friend, and she gets that whole moment of here's my child taken from her. Where has your family been left in all of this?
I actually have 4 daughters. And my husband, Casey, was Kobe's friend. They've known each other since elementary school. So, I had this huge loss, but my husband also lost his friend, and my daughters lost the best uncle in the world that they could have ever had. He did sleepovers with them, and he was at every birthday party. He would come hours in advance to help me decorate. He was there for hours on end when I had Abby, my oldest daughter, just waiting for her to come into the world. And, I was 18 and scared to death to even tell him that I was pregnant. But man, he was the best uncle, and he was there for me every step of the way. I couldn't ask for a better brother or a better uncle for my kids. And I still cry at events for my kids. I cry at Christmas because he was always there at Christmas and helped me, bring the presents out on Christmas Eve, and he helped the kids put their stuff together and play with them on Christmas Day. This huge part of our family is gone. I don't have a large family. My dad completed suicide when I was 13, and Coby kind of got me through that. Got us both through that. And that was really hard to go through. And we lost a lot of other family members to death and to abandonment because, my brother was gay. And so a lot of our family was not incredibly supportive. So when it came down to it, we were what we had. I was upset about that for a little while. But then I started realizing how great of a team that Coby and I made, and how he was so perfect, and I could tell him anything and he was always there for me and my kids. I didn't need anything else. That was okay. I had gone through all of this stuff, but I had my kids and I had my husband and I had my best friend in the whole world, and I was going to be okay. And it took me a really, really long time to get there after my dad died. And, finally I had done that, and I had gotten through all this stuff with my brother by my side. And now I'm going through the worst thing I have ever gone through. And the one person I need to talk to about it, and the one person I need to get me through that, is in fact Coby. But he's gone. And I can't even tell you how that's affected me mentally. I have, contemplated suicide myself throughout all of this. So not only did they take his life, but they almost took mine and wrecked my kid's life further, because trying to live when your brother was brutally gunned down and left there to die is, I mean, how do you even get through that? How do you pick your feet up and move yourself forward? So we have just lost this huge part of our family, and my kids still cry. In fact, not too long ago when Kobe Bryant died, my kids came home crying from school because, you know, Kobe's name was not super common. So now they were hearing Kobe everywhere, and it was really emotional for them. I had to hold my sobbing child because she missed her uncle. And that's not the first time I've had to hold them and console them when my own heart is broken. And that is the hardest thing I've had to do is, you know, have my own broken heart and try to mend my kids' broken heart and stay alive for them. And it's frustrating because everyone's like, well, you have kids and you have your husband and you have this. And yes, you know, I am blessed in other areas, but if, God forbid, something had ever happened to my child, I totally believe my brother would have been the only person that could have got me through that. Because he's gotten me through everything, every terrible thing I ever went through. And he just had this amazing ability to build me up. He would tell me, you know, you're amazing, you're a great mom, you know, you're beautiful. And it's funny because he'd comment on my Facebook posts and talk about how cute my outfit choices were that day and things, and just all this support and love that I'm not going to get that from anybody else, not the way that he gave that to me. And that's been hard to live without. I've had to kind of relive the moments that, you know, he's said things to me and like, okay, Kayla, he wouldn't want you to feel this way. He wouldn't want you to do this. He wouldn't want you to be this low because he's gotten you out of being this low before. Well, maybe not quite this low, but so it's literally been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
And I mean, this is what people don't, you know, you hear podcasts and it's a case and it's laid out, and this is what people don't hear. So I can't commend your strength enough for participating. You know, when we reached out to you, you were absolutely on board, and, you know, you said, this is the hardest thing that I've gone through, but I just can't let it go. So this is what we want people to hear. Unfortunately, this is the ripple effect of a murder, and this is what you don't hear in a lot of podcasts is what's been going on with the people that are, you know, affected by this. So again, 317-262-TIPS is the Crime Stoppers number that we would like for you to call. And I'm going to hand it over to Jasmine on any final thoughts.
Kayla, we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to share your brother's story with us. We want to extend our deepest condolences to you and your family. You know, the fact that you continue to be that voice for your brother and you continue to do for him and his memory and his life what you feel he always did for you, which was, you know, protect you. In a weird way, this is you continuing to, you know, protect Kobe's voice by continuing to advocate for him. So we just want to commend you, tell you thank you so much for being willing to come on the podcast with us.
Thank you guys for having me on here. I appreciate you guys, you know, reaching out and being willing to share the story. And really, I just can't imagine doing this any other way. I hear that a lot where, you know, where they don't understand how I can do this. And it is hard. It takes a very big mental toll on me. However, I can't think of any other way to do it. I'm Kobe's voice now, and I have to speak out on his behalf. I know if it were switched, he wouldn't stop until he had justice either.
We genuinely can't thank Kala Klein enough for her participation in the podcast. We were able to connect with Detective Benner through her. He's the lead detective on the case. You'll hear his interview now. Okay, so we have been lucky enough to speak with Detective Benner, who is the lead detective on the case, and we have him here on the line. If you wouldn't mind telling us, Detective Benner, just your background in law enforcement, how long you have been in law enforcement, and a little bit about yourself.
I've been on IMPD for 30 years. I've been in homicide for 13 years. I moved here from Ohio, so I've lived in Indianapolis since 1989.
So you definitely have some experience as far as being in the force and specifically homicide. So We're speaking with you today about one of your cases that you're the lead detective on, which is Kobi Lee Walden. He was murdered on May 1st, 2017 in the Southport area. There has been, multiple crimes in that area. As far as taking us back to the beginning and your involvement in the case, what can you tell us about the case?
Well, it was early in the morning. There were some fishermen that were going down by the creek behind where Kobi Walden lived in his apartment. They located him lying back there in a wooded area. There's like a path that leads down towards the creek there. We found some of his belongings on the sidewalk in front of his apartment, and his car was still parked in a parking spot right outside where he normally parked. His cell phone was missing. He didn't really have any property on him, so it's possible that robbery could have been a motive. We explored the possibility that maybe a past relationship led to a domestic type situation, but I pretty much have ruled that out early on in the investigation. So like a month later, there was another shooting out there in the same complex where two people were shot and one died. I tried to find a link between the two cases, and we could not link the cases with the murder weapon or anything like that, and that case still remains unsolved also. Looked into the possibility that people that live in the area or frequent the area visit some of the residents out there that could be involved in robberies and that type of thing, which kind of created a long list, but I couldn't really attach anybody to this case. We've made pleas to the public several times. I know I've been in contact with his sister, Kayla, on several occasions, who has really kept up on the case and has done everything she can to try to generate leads, and all that help is appreciated. Obviously, we like to do everything we can to clear the cases to give closure to the families. I have not really received many tips at all in reference to Kobi's case, so hopefully getting it out the way you are trying to put it back out to the public will generate some more leads, and we can try to get to the bottom of what happened to Kobi.
Absolutely. That's certainly our goal. We feel like, now that we've got podcasting and we've got these other avenues that can be used, we certainly want to use that platform to do so. So bringing it back, that was specifically something I was going to bring up to you. We were aware that there was the murder that occurred a month later. It was actually a Navy veteran. Her name was Erin Mills. It was her fiance that actually had called that in. And I know it was said that he was in the apartment and she was found outside. Were there any witnesses at all besides him that came forward in that case?
No, I don't believe that there were. Maybe people that heard shots, but that was another case where I believe the suspect caught them getting out of the car and going into the apartment, which is basically what Coby was doing. He had just pulled up after going to the store, was sitting in his car, I believe, either texting or talking to somebody on the phone. He exited the car with his gym bag and some groceries, and that's when somebody confronted him right there. So somebody saw him getting out of his vehicle too. So they kind of matched in that respect. That's why we thought it could be the same suspect. But there were no eyewitnesses, and certainly nobody in Koby's case saw anything. They did hear some shots fired that night, the night before he was found. Officers checked the area, but they didn't go back into the wooded area behind the building. I don't know if they had any reason to do that at that time. They was unsure. It was just an apartment complex. We get calls like that all the time, and the shots could have come from anywhere in the complex. So other than hearing the shots that night, nobody really saw anybody leaving the area or any vehicles fleeing or anything like that. And as far as the Erin Mills, I don't think there was anybody that saw anybody that night either. There might have been another street type robbery around the same time where somebody did get some brief description, and this, like we said, we're unsure if they're related to the Erin Mills case or Koby's case either, so kind of come up empty in that respect.
That's what we were kind of comparing the two cases. We had noticed, that there were similarities in that the person was potentially dressed the same way, but the murder weapons actually did not match. So that kind of leaves us with, essentially needing the public's help in this case. So there's got to have been somebody that had seen something, heard something. And again, this was on May 1st, 2017. Is there any final thoughts or words that you may have as far as how the public could go about reaching you or who they could call if they'd like to stay anonymous?
Yes, they can call the 327-TIPS. That's the anonymous line we have through Crime Stoppers. They can call the main homicide number at 317-327-3475. They can call my desk number at 317-327-3311. And I have a work cell phone number they could also call, 317-402-2843.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we know that there is kind of a standstill with this case, so we appreciate everything that you've been able to speak with us on. Is there any other information that you think that would be viable to the public knowing that maybe hasn't really been discussed? Not because it can't be, but because the news coverage is so limited as far as getting these cases out there. Unfortunately, our city has been, ravaged with crime recently, and so that leaves so little time for the news media to fully focus on these cases. Is there anything else that you could think of as a final thought?
I can say that in cases like this, almost any murder case that we have, the person or persons involved are going to tell somebody about it, whether it's a family member or a friend, relative. They're going to talk about it or and tell somebody about it. So if anybody has any information, no matter how small, anybody that might have had information about the case and they even don't think that they're involved at all, if anybody was even talking about it, I'd like to know who, because a lot of things were not released about the case, so anybody with any information could very well have knowledge of who's involved. So I just ask people to think back and see if anybody spoke about Kobe's case and what happened to him, and see if they can relay that information to myself and the homicide branch of IMPD.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, we certainly appreciate your time, taking the time out to speak with us. We know that you're a very, very busy person, and the cases aren't slowing down in our city. So we thank you again for being on the line with us today. And we will hopefully have, information that comes in maybe through the podcast or through the tip lines after this airs. So we thank you again.
Yes, ma'am. I thank you for all the effort you're putting forth also. Thank you.
Thank you. First off, we want to thank everybody for listening and tuning into the podcast. This has definitely been a work in progress, and we can't thank everybody for participating more. We have had so much information given to us and willingness to participate from Simon, Diana, Kayla, as well as Detective Benner. Now that we've gotten everything taken in, we've looked at all the information, this truly is a case that is going to rely on the public. If you're going to get speculative, there's 1,000 ways your mind could go in this. It is an area of high crime. He had been in a bad, relationship prior with a bad breakup, and there were similar cases in the area. So Jasmine, after, everything that we know, what is your take on things?
After listening to the detective's statement and just listening to everything that we have had our guests tell us, as well as Kayla, I think that you're certainly right. This is something that's just going to be very reliant on public information to come forward. This is one of those things that we really need someone out there to speak up to help bring this family justice for Kobe, to hopefully give this family the closure that they definitely deserve and certainly need. And I do think that law enforcement has done everything possible in exploring all avenues and leads that they have. And I certainly hope to see the public come forward, hopefully after this case is discussed more, maybe with some tips and information to help get Kayla and her family justice for Kobe.
Definitely. And not only just the public, I mean, somebody might have seen something, but like the detective said, somebody's more than likely been told about this and And so we can only hope through asking anybody that's listening to share this link, especially if you're in the local area, just so that, it may come across the person who has that guilty conscience weighing on them. As we've said, you can turn in the information completely anonymous. We're going to wrap everything up, but we definitely want to give credits where credits are due. So in the beginning of the podcast, you heard a clip, and that was from Crime Watch Daily. We will have the link to that video in the description box. as well as we want to give our music credits are going to go to MizzleMack Productions. We would like to thank everybody that's listened, participated. The editing is done by myself, so bear with us as we learn and we progress over time. We do have a Facebook page. So you can find us at Crimelight Podcast, and that's Crimelight, one word, Light. And as well as a YouTube channel that you can find us on under the same name. Jasmine, do you want to tell them about our Gmail?
Absolutely. If you have case suggestions, tips, or anything you would like to share with us, you can reach us at our Gmail address, crimelightpodcast, all one word, at gmail.com.
If you'd like to interact with the cases, we have a private Facebook discussion group that you can join. We look forward to speaking with you. Thanks for tuning in to Crimelight Podcast.